Am I the a-hole for telling my wife to tell her mom to move out of our home after she decided to leave all inheritance to her brother? I never thought I'd be writing one of these. I usually just lurk on the sub while I'm on my lunch break, but honestly, my life has become a series of spreadsheets, funeral arrangements, and a growing sense of resentment that I can't seem to shake. I'm exhausted, my wife is furious with me, and I feel like I'm being treated like an administrative assistant rather than a member of the family. To give you some background, I'm 32, and my wife is 30. We've been married for 4 years. We aren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. We have a modest home, we both work full-time, and like most people our age, we're careful with our spending. My wife's family is complicated. Her father, Phil, was essentially the glue holding 3 adults together. He was the only true adult in their household. He worked, he handled every single bill, he did the grocery shopping, and he even drove my mother-in-law, Mil, late 50s, to and from work every single day because she doesn't drive and doesn't speak English. Then there's my brother-in-law, Bil, 27. He's not a bad guy in the sense that he's mean or aggressive, but he is completely stagnant. He lives at home, has no friends he sees in person, and his entire existence consists of going to his job, coming home, and playing video games until he passes out. He has no driver's license, yet he drives a car to work every day, which is a legal time bomb I've tried to warn them about. He has no concept of how the world works because Phil did everything for him. When Phil passed away unexpectedly a few months ago, the house of cards collapsed. Mil and Bil were so distraught they couldn't even stay in their own home. The grief was real, but the helplessness was even more real. Without Phil to drive them, feed them, or tell them what mail to open, they were paralyzed. Against my better judgment but out of love for my wife, we agreed to let them move into our house temporarily. Since they moved in, I have become the unofficial executor of a life I didn't live. Because Mil doesn't speak English and Bil doesn't care to help, I took over everything. I'm talking about digging through filing cabinets, calling utility companies, dealing with the mortgage on their house, and trying to figure out if Phil even had a will. It turns out, they didn't even know where Phil worked. I had to track down his employer just to see if there were any benefits. Through weeks of heavy lifting, I discovered a very sizable life insurance policy. It was a shock to everyone. Mil and Bil had no idea it existed. They have 0 retirement savings, no investments, nothing. This money was a godsend, or it should have been. While I was doing all this paperwork, my wife was doing the physical labor. She took over her father's role as the chauffeur. She wakes up early to drive her mom to work, picks her up, takes her to the grocery store, and handles all the translation for her daily needs. This is on top of her own 40-hour work week. It's a lot. She's exhausted, I'm exhausted, and our house feels cramped. The plan was for them to stay with us, pay a small amount of rent to help with the increased utilities and groceries, and eventually rent out their family home. Since they bought that house years ago when interest rates were low, they stand to make about $1,000 a month in pure profit from rent. Between that and their jobs, they would be more than fine. Once the life insurance payout was confirmed, I sat down with Mil and my wife. I suggested a shared high-yield savings account for Mil and my wife. My thought process was simple. Mil has never had a bank account in her life. She doesn't understand interest, inflation, or how to pay a digital bill. Having my wife on the account would ensure the money was protected and used to pay Mil's expenses. That's when Mil dropped the bomb. She looked me dead in the eye, with my wife translating, and said she didn't want my wife's name on any account. She decided that she is giving her entire portion of the payout, every cent, to her son, my Bil. Her reasoning? You and your wife already have a house. You are doing fine. Your brother has nothing and isn't as smart, so he needs it more. I was floored. My wife has spent the last few years being the good daughter. When Mil had breast cancer, it was my wife who took her to every single chemo appointment, used up all her sick leave, and stayed up nights caring for her. Bill? He stayed in his room and played games. He didn't even drive her to one appointment because, again, he doesn't have a license. Now, because my wife worked hard, got an education, and bought a home with me, she's being effectively disinherited in favor of a 27-year-old man who can't even be bothered to learn how to pay a water bill. I tried to be the voice of reason. I told Mil that giving a massive lump sum to Bil was the most irresponsible thing she could do. I've seen his bank statements while helping with the estate. The kid actually has a decent amount of cash in his checking account simply because he has no concept of spending it on anything other than gaming skins. He has no retirement plan, no grasp of financial maturity, and he will likely blow through the inheritance or just let it sit and rot while he continues to live off others. But Mil wouldn't budge. To her, fairness means giving everything to the child who is the least capable. After the conversation, I pulled my wife aside. I told her, this is a slap in the face. We have opened our home, I have spent dozens of hours fixing their legal and financial lives, and you are currently acting as your mother's personal driver. In exchange, they are treating you like you don't exist in the eyes of the family estate. I told my wife that if this is how it's going to be, they need to move out. Now, I said, if Bill is the one getting all the money because he needs it, then he can use that money to take care of your mother. They can move back to their house, use the payout to hire a driver or an assistant, and figure it out. I am not going to facilitate their lifestyle and do all the labor for an estate that sees you as unworthy of an inheritance because you're successful. My wife blew up at me. She called me heartless and said I only care about the money. She said her mom and brother can't survive on their own because they can't communicate. Side note, they can communicate. Mil speaks Spanish, Bil understands Spanish but speaks English. They've lived together for 27 years, they have a shorthand. It's just easier for them to let my wife do the talking. My wife thinks I'm being a monster for kicking them out while they are grieving. I feel like I'm being used. I'm the one doing the taxes, the estate planning, and the house maintenance, while the person receiving all the benefits contributes nothing to the household and is being handed a fortune for just existing. Is it about the money? Maybe a little. We could have used a small portion of that inheritance to pay down our mortgage or save for our future kids. But more than that, it's the principle. It's the fact that my wife is being penalized for being the responsible one. By staying in our house rent-free, which we agreed to for the first few months, and receiving the full inheritance, they are essentially taking advantage of our stability to build a nest egg for the BIL while we shoulder the stress and the bills. The BIL hasn't offered to help with a single thing in the house. He doesn't mow the lawn, he doesn't help with the dishes, and he hasn't even thanked me for sorting out the mess his father left behind. He just waits for my wife to tell him when dinner is ready. I told my wife that if she doesn't tell her mom to start looking for a move-out date, I'm going to stop helping with the estate. I'm done calling the lawyers, I'm done translating the documents, and I'm done managing the rental of their old house. If Bil is the heir, Bil can do the work. My wife hasn't spoken to me in 24 hours. She's sleeping on the couch, by choice, to be near her mom, and I'm sitting in our room wondering if I actually am the asshole here. I feel like I'm the only one looking at the long-term reality of this situation. If we let this happen, we will be taking care of her mother and brother for the rest of their lives while the money that was supposed to help them is squandered or hoarded by the brother. So, am I the a-hole for demanding they move out? Update. Not the update I wanted to share, and I know it's been a long time. I held off because I didn't want to post something half-finished or based on emotions that hadn't settled yet. A lot has happened since then, and while there are some improvements, it's not the clean resolution I think most people were hoping for. After everything blew up the first time, things didn't immediately change. There wasn't some big turning point where everyone suddenly understood each other. Instead, it was a slow shift over months, with a lot of work in between, most of it falling on me and my wife. The biggest development is what happened with my mother-in-law's house. We ended up taking full responsibility for getting it ready to rent out. That meant going back and forth constantly, organizing repairs, finding contractors, coordinating schedules, and handling all the communication. The house needed more work than expected, so what should have been a quick turnaround turned into months of effort. We were the ones meeting with people, making decisions, managing costs, and making sure things didn't fall apart. My mother-in-law paid for the actual renovations, but everything else, the time, the planning, the coordination, came from us. It wasn't something we were forced into, but it became clear early on that if we didn't handle it, it simply wouldn't get done. During that time, my wife kept pushing for her brother to be involved. She would bring it up to her mom, who would then relay it to him. His response never really changed. He didn't step in, didn't take initiative, and didn't seem to think it was something he needed to be part of unless someone directly told him to do a specific task. Even then, things rarely moved unless we followed through ourselves. By the time everything was finished and we found tenants, it had been 3 to 4 months of consistent effort. When it was all said and done, we were given around $500. It wasn't insulting, but it also didn't reflect the amount of work that went into it. That said, I didn't expect to be paid. I've said that from the beginning, and I mean it. Still, it added to the overall feeling that what we were doing wasn't being fully recognized. One thing that did improve during this period was the living situation. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law started paying rent after the initial period we had agreed on. That helped ease some of the tension, at least financially. It made things feel a little more balanced and less like everything was falling on us. Another positive change is that my brother-in-law now takes his mom to work. That alone made a noticeable difference in our daily lives. My wife isn't spending hours driving anymore, which means she gets home earlier, has more energy, and we actually have time together again. That part, at least, feels like progress. Where things didn't improve is with the inheritance. The plan, at one point, was for my brother-in-law to return his portion to my mother-in-law so she could secure her future. She has almost no retirement savings, and that money could have made a real difference for her long-term stability. That plan never happened. Instead, my mother-in-law kept her share, and my brother-in-law kept his. Nothing was redistributed, and my wife still received nothing. What makes it harder to accept is how that money is being handled. His portion is just sitting in a checking account, not growing, not being used in any meaningful way, and not contributing to anything. It's just there. If we had known early on that this was how things would play out, we would have made very different decisions about the living arrangements. At this point, though, the house is rented out under a lease, so going back isn't really an option right now. Because they're paying rent to us, I continued helping with everything else for a while. Paperwork, appointments, documents, anything that needed to be handled still came through me. It felt a little less one-sided with the rent involved, but the underlying issue never really went away. The biggest sticking point has been my wife's relationship with her brother. She has gone to him directly more than once. Not asking for half, not making demands, just asking for something, whatever he believes is fair considering everything that's been done. Every time, the answer has been no. It doesn't turn into an argument. It doesn't escalate. It just ends there. At some point, my mother-in-law's perspective started to shift. It didn't happen overnight, but after living with us and seeing everything up close, she began to understand things differently. She went from believing her son should have everything to hoping he would step up and do what she believes his father would have wanted. She's even said that she thought the money might push him to take responsibility, to take care of her, and to support his sister in some way. That hasn't happened. There have been moments where she's been emotional about it, especially when comparing how much we've done versus how little involvement he's had. That realization has been hard for her. On a more positive note, she did take steps to include my wife in the future of the house. Both my wife and her brother are now tied into the mortgage, and my wife is also on the title. That part matters. It gives her some level of security and recognition that wasn't there before. It also reflects a change in how my mother-in-law views her daughter's role. That shift has improved their relationship quite a bit. Things between them are in a much better place now than they were when I first posted. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for my wife and her brother. That relationship has deteriorated over time. It's not explosive or dramatic, but there's distance there now that wasn't there before. The lack of effort, combined with the way the inheritance was handled, created a gap that hasn't been repaired. The most frustrating part, and the part that pushed things to a breaking point for me, happened recently. Despite everything, my brother-in-law still doesn't have a driver's license. He's been driving this entire time without one. On top of that, we found out his car registration is expired because he doesn't have insurance. This wasn't a small oversight. It's a serious issue, and it's been ongoing. We've talked to him about it more than once. Explained the risks, the consequences, what could happen if he gets pulled over. Nothing changed. Finding out about the expired registration was where I hit my limit. Up until that point, I was still helping with everything. Payments, documents, scheduling, if it needed to be done, I was involved. Seeing that situation made it clear that nothing was actually changing on his end. At that point, we made a decision. We told him we were done handling things for him. No more stepping in for basic responsibilities. No more managing things he should be capable of doing himself. If there's something genuinely complicated or beyond his understanding, we'll help. But everything else is on him now. This wasn't an easy call, and my mother-in-law didn't fully agree with it at first. She thought it was too harsh. Over time, though, she started to see why it might be necessary. There's only so much you can do for someone before it stops being help and starts being enabling. He does contribute in small ways. During the renovation, he helped clean when asked. He takes his mom to work now. But beyond that, there hasn't been any real initiative. At this point, he has the time, the money, and the opportunity to take control of his situation. Whether he actually does is still up in the air. As for me and my wife, things are more stable than they were before, but the stress hasn't completely gone away. We're managing better, and at least now there are some boundaries in place. I don't regret helping. I don't regret taking them in. But I also can't ignore how much it's taken out of us. That's where things stand right now. I know a lot of people will have opinions on what we should do next, and I'm open to hearing them. The first time I posted, the feedback actually helped more than I expected, so I figured it was worth sharing where things ended up.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.